My father and I are strikingly alike, from our deep brown eyes to our perfectly toned legs. But believe me, it is more than skin deep. Anger, aggression, and the propensity to argue are deeply rooted. And this is where my story begins. Screams filled the air. Mom and Dad were fighting once again. I left my room to the view of my dad grabbing my mom and hitting her while she screamed and cried to get away. After years of constant emotional and physical abuse, this was the first time my mom found the courage to call the police. The problem with domestic violence is it happens with those we are intimate with and love. A brother, sister, mother, and in my case, my father. But domestic violence is not permanent. It is a learned behavior that will only be changed through abusers' realization and intervention of the problem. Thus, instead of sending abusers of domestic violence to jail, we need to educate them in a counseling and anger management recovery program. In order to prove that this is a necessary change in our judicial system, first, I will demonstrate how domestic violence is a serious problem in our society. Next, I will show how domestic violence affects everyone. Then, I will prove how domestic violence is a learned behavior and will end with how mending abusers instead of punishing them will greatly minimize domestic violence. Domestic violence is a serious problem in our society, and not only in our country, but around the world. First, what is domestic violence? Domestic violence, according to the American Psychiatric Association, domestic violence is control by one partner over another in a dating, marital, or live-in relationship. Knowing that, did you know that a woman is a victim of domestic violence once every 15 seconds in the United States? And that one in every 4 women will become victims of domestic violence at least once in their lifetime? In the United States, 1.3 million women and 835,000 men are victims of domestic violence every year. And domestic violence doesn't only end at our borders. According to a study done by the World Health Organization, countries as diverse as Japan, Ethiopia, and Brazil experience domestic violence at rates as high as 15 to 71%. Since historically, domestic violence has been seen as a private matter of the household, it has been individualized, silenced, and ignored from the community's problems. But this is not the case. Domestic violence affects everyone. It affects people from all backgrounds, from all religious, socio-economic, same-sex, and heterosexual relationships. Domestic violence affects the victim, abuser, friends, family, co-workers, and children surrounded by it. It can lead to emotional traumas such as depression, mental illness, and suicide to the victim. And children are affected whether they witness the abuse or not. Children exposed to domestic violence are at risk for developmental problems, psychiatric disorders, school difficulties, aggressive behavior, and low self-esteem. Domestic violence does not just affect those directly involved. It affects everyone through the impact on the economy. A 2003 study by the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention shows that domestic violence costs the U.S. economy an average of $5.8 billion every year, where the major cost comes from healthcare costs of $4.1 billion. But it doesn't only affect our economy, it affects economies all over the world. The United Kingdom loses an average of 23 billion pounds a year. Australia, 8.2 billion, Canada, 4.2 billion, and New Zealand, 1.2 billion. The Office of Child Abuse and Neglect denotes some people believe that domestic violence happens because the victim provokes it, or that the abuser has natural anger management problems. But this is not true. The Office of Child Abuse and Neglect teaches that as a learned behavior, domestic violence is modeled by individuals, institutions, and society. It can be learned through many different ways. Through childhood observations of domestic violence, one's experience of victimization, exposure to the community, school, or peer group violence, and growing up in a culture of violence. Many abusers learn violence as role models as children, so they continue to use it as a way to deal with stress and control conflict. But boys that have been grown up around domestic violence are twice as likely to abuse their children, and victims are more likely to maltreat than children than those who are not victims. Since domestic violence is a learned behavior, it can only be reversed by mending and educating abusers instead of punishing them. Sending abusers to jail does not fix the root of the problem. It minimizes and ignores it, which teaches the abuser that the behavior is not only justified, but acceptable. Jail time does not reverse the problem. It is shown by the National Institute of Justice that approximately 30% of abusers released from jail will re-abuse in the short term and an even larger percentage in the long term. On the other hand, a study done by the Illinois Justice Department shows that a domestic violence intervention program reduced re-abuse by 63%. Today, I showed how domestic violence is a serious problem, why domestic violence affects everyone. I proved that domestic violence is a learned behavior, and that mending and educating abusers instead of sending them to jail will greatly minimize domestic violence. Thus, instead of sending abusers to jail, we need to educate them in a counseling and anger management recovery program. Abusers are the people we are intimate with and love. They're not evil by nature, but they have learned a violent behavior that can and needs to be reversed. Through counseling and anger management, there is a way to reverse the behavior. Through the abuser's realization and intervention of the problem. Any habit can be broken, but that means there must be a change. Thank you.